Our story begins as sunset before a majestic castle that stands imposing against the sky tinged with orange and purple hues. Inside, it is possible to see the emperor sitting on his throne while a man in front of him explains something, asking the opinion of His Majesty named Michael Tonettebrand, who looked at him with visible boredom. Simply, the emperor ordered the man to apologize, seeming somewhat enraged. The old man in front of him looked at him with visible fear in his eyes, trying to understand what the emperor meant by that. At that moment, the people around froze and looked at each other after the emperor's order. A red-haired woman then told the citizens that the emperor had ordered them to investigate the Duke of Ruscarel. The woman, who was the secretary named Letitia, stood in front of the emperor, who looked at her confused, waiting for her to speak while she said she would check the schedule. Michael then looked at the paper that Letitia had handed him, starting to read it, saying only one word, which was ocean, making a woman stare at him seriously. She then looked at the subjects and told them that the emperor had ordered them to reorganize the knights, leaving everyone in shock upon hearing that. While Letitia spoke, a young man looked at her open-mouthed, hearing her say that if the kingdom of Tetten wanted a rebellion, they would have a rebellion, and that everyone should prepare for anything that might happen. Some people who were there began to spread out around the palace after the emperor finished his speeches. Men looked at each other thoughtfully about what had just happened. An old man with a gallant look told another man that fortunately, this time no one had died. Thanks to Michael's secretary, everything was working perfectly. But how could she dare to do all that, being just a commoner? Executions of nobles and the royal family, all that came from the woman's mouth, perhaps because the prince did not speak very well. A man then approached the gentleman and said they should be more careful about what they were saying, as other people could hear. And it did not matter if the woman was a noble or a commoner, because she was the only one in the entire empire who understood the emperor, translating everything correctly. 10 years had passed since she started that job. It seemed that she understood him even better than before. Raising her hand to her forehead, the woman wondered if she had tried too hard, with an expression of tiredness. The man beside her looked at her worriedly, saying he would send the documents in Letitia's place, asking her to go back and rest a bit. With a grateful look, the red-haired woman told the young man that things did not work without her there, so she would go. With a smile, the guy told the lady that he had heard she had been working on that for 10 years and that he admired her a lot. Turning her back to him, Letitia told him to stop talking nonsense and go finish the document he had not managed before. With that, the young man said he would take it to her office, and she wished him a good day with a smile on her face. Alone, she walked with her briefcase down the corridor. Sighing with relief, she said to herself that everything seemed calmer. However, she tangled her feet and tripped. Then she let out a small scream, scared, heading for the ground. But a hand grabbed her arm before that happened. It was the handsome emperor, who was looking at her with a serious expression. Letitia then looked at him, startled and surprised by that situation. With a charming look at the woman, the emperor smiled at her. Michael then said something to Letitia that made her ask him not to say that, since he had already done enough for her. With a shy smile, the secretary asked him to analyze the documents she was carrying. The man with one hand on the door handle gave a smile to Letitia, taking the documents, and said that it was perfect. A man with such an angelic smile, who could imagine that he would become a tyrant feared by all. Michael was the only one with legitimate blood, so when he took the throne, he killed all the nobles and vassals, thus becoming known as a bloodthirsty tyrant. That had been one of the most terrible events ever seen in the empire. Sadly, Letitia closed her eyes, remembering that the people who were killed could not say anything. Then she opened her eyes fearlessly, saying to herself that none of that would happen. Michael rested his hand on the books on his desk and told the lady to sit down, but she said she preferred to stand. Catching Michael's attention by calling his name, he looked at her seriously. The woman then swallowed hard before speaking what she intended. Looking at the floor, she began her speech, saying that she would like to say something to Michael. She then clenched her hand into a fist, gathering courage, and let it all out in one go, saying that she wanted to resign, leaving Michael surprised by that. He looked at her in shock, mouth agape, without saying a word, while she continued, saying that they needed to find someone to replace her as soon as possible. Upon saying this, the emperor quickly hugged the woman, leaving her astonished and in shock by their attitude. With that, the emperor began to beg the woman not to abandon him and to stay with him. Scared, the red-haired girl widened her eyes in the embrace. Trembling, unable to believe it, the woman was in shock. Looking at him, the beautiful lady, thoughtful, wondered what he meant. while the man looked at her with a sad expression, calling her name. Closing her eyes and feeling dizzy, the teacher asked herself one thing. When the woman fell backward, Michael shouted her name, rushing to try to catch her. But she fell to the ground fainting, with the handsome man holding her back. Her only question was, since when Michael could speak normally. Letitia woke up suddenly, focusing her gaze on the ceiling, and quickly got up, remembering what had happened. With that, she saw the Emperor staring at her and called him in surprise. Looking around, she tried to ask him something. He approached the woman, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. He rested his forehead against Letitia's, leaving her embarrassed. Then he stepped back casually, saying that she did not have a fever. When Michael turned his back, moving away from his secretary, she asked him to wait. He then stopped walking upon hearing this, and responded, saying that they had time to talk later and the woman should rest at that moment. Leaving Letitia alone in a giant room, Michael walked away from the place. The woman then leaned on the bed, turning to the side. While she looked thoughtfully at the window in front of the bed, she wondered when everything had started to go wrong. Maybe it had been when she met the Emperor. That was probably her destiny. Then she began to remember 11 years ago, when she was just a child beginning to wake up. She got up from her bed, putting on her sandals, put on her apron, tying it, and headed to the kitchen, then preparing a vegetable soup that seemed delicious for her parents. With a smile on her face, Letitia knocked on their bedroom door, calling them as it was already morning. With a tired look due to sleep, her parents said good morning to the girl. And with a sweet smile, the girl looked at her parents, telling them to sit down and eat sandwiches before they got cold, since she had prepared them when she woke up. With an angry look, a boy sitting at the table lamented about the cabbage soup since he hated it, but Letitia said he should eat it so he would not get weak. While eating, the girl's father asked her if she had already fed her grandmother. Letitia said she had already taken the food, and then her mother said it was time for them to go. A person beside her agreed, picking up a piece of clothing that was on top of a basket. The red-haired girl then said she hoped everything would go well on her parents' trip, picking up the basket and leaving the house while her mother told her to take care. In a small, beautiful village in the middle of the forest, a man selling fruit, when he saw Letitia, wished her a good day with a smile. Some ladies, when Letitia passed by, asked if the girl was going to the mountains again, to which she affirmed, saying that it was an incredible morning. One of the ladies said that the girl's parents should be proud of her. With a shy smile, Letitia looked down timidly and affirmed that her parents were really proud, because if they were not, who else would be? Next to the girl, a lady said she envied the woods a lot, and the guy beside her said he wished his daughter were like her. Smiling, Letitia looked at her basket, thinking that that day it would return full of herbs for her grandmother. Her parents and grandmother would be very happy to see that. And still in the mountains, the sun was already setting. A storm was falling in the place with strong wind, but the girl still continued to pick her herbs, crouched in the rain. Very cold because she had not imagined it would rain that day. But crying, she knew she could not go home at that moment, because she had only managed to gather 3 herbs, and her parents would be sad about that. Trying to motivate herself, the girl said she would not give up and continue to search for more herbs. Disappointed, she saw an herb, but it would not work for her grandmother. With tears falling from her eyes in the rain, she tried not to give up because her parents were still working at that hour. If she could not get the herbs, which were her only duty, so many things could happen, and she began to think about the consequences of bringing only her 3 herbs home, placing them on the table while apologizing. Her mother would stroke her head, telling her not to be sad because she had done a good job. But she would be frightened to hear her father asking what he was going to do, because there were not enough herbs for her mother, and if it continued that way, they would have to call a doctor. With that, Letitia's grandmother would not last much longer than a month. Coming out of her thoughts, the little girl heard a loud noise. She wondered if it was a bear, but she had never seen one, though a hunter once said that he had found a massacred deer and there were several claw marks on the tree trunks. Thinking about this, the girl wondered if that was not very terrifying, but fortunately, she was not heading towards those mountains. With the strong wind and rain on her face, Letitia put one hand on her forehead and the other just below her chin. Her basket tipped over, causing the 3 herbs she had managed to gather to fall. Frightened and astonished, the girl wondered if she was really seeing that. A handsome blonde boy with light eyes was looking at her sadly. With a look of pity, Letitia stared at the boy, asking who he was and where his parents were, but he looked down and said nothing. She asked where he lived and if he was lost, but still got no response from the boy. Confused, Letitia asked why he was not answering her. Then a good reason came to her mind. Maybe he could not understand her, or maybe he could not hear. That would really be a good explanation. In an attempt to communicate with the boy, the girl began to spell out, asking if he could hear her, leaving him surprised by that. Letitia, seeing no result, felt frustrated and wondered why he was alone on that mountain. She then noticed his clothes, which seemed quite expensive. Maybe he came from a rich family. Surprised by the thought, the girl, without thinking, asked if he had run away from home. With no response, Letitia sighed in frustration. She reached out for her basket, knowing she needed to get back home. She had only managed to get 5 herbs, but that was not important because she needed to get that boy out of there. He was trembling with cold, so Letitia thought her parents would understand. After all, the strong must protect the weak. She placed her hand over the boy's hands, knowing she could gather more herbs the next day. He widened his eyes at Letitia's gesture. She then said they should return to the village because it was dangerous there, as there were many bears. With the heavy rain falling, they heard a noise. The red-haired girl then hurriedly pulled the boy's hand to get away from there. While they ran through the forest in the rain, Letitia looked at the sky worriedly because the rain was increasing and they needed to hurry. But with this thought, she ended up tripping over some stones and fell. The two were thrown to the ground by the unexpected fall. When Letitia seemed to remember something important, she began to desperately search for her basket because she could not find it. Then, as if hit by a stone, she saw her basket fallen and her herbs scattered. Picking them up in her hands while trembling in despair, Letitia realized they were spoiled. Thus, they could not be used for the medicine. And with that thought, the girl began to cry. With tears falling from her face, she lamented not being able to do anything else when a hand with a handkerchief reached out to her, wiping her eyes. Surprised by that, she turned to see what was happening. Seeing the handsome boy holding the handkerchief, sad to see her in that situation, Letitia began to laugh, enchanted by his cuteness. She placed her hands over the boy's, squeezing them lightly, and thanked him with a charming smile and her eyes shining. Then, determined, she realized she needed to be strong, and, looking around, tried to find a way out of that place while the boy looked sadly down. The girl looked up from where they had fallen and realized they could not go back the same way, but a thought made her try to climb the mountain. When she rested her hand on a loose rock, the boy quickly pulled her, shouting for her to duck. Trying to understand why she should duck, the first thing that came to Letitia's mind was that the boy could speak. When a landslide occurred right where she had been a moment ago, the girl looked at the scene in amazement, realizing she had narrowly avoided being crushed and turned into Letitia puree. In shock, looking at the rocks that had fallen beside her, the boy, who we know as Michael, was looking tensely at the situation. After thinking she could have been crushed by those rocks, Letitia jumped on the boy, hugging him and thanking him for warning her that she was in danger, leaving him embarrassed by the scene. The boy then mentioned the basket, and the girl agreed that she could have been crushed like her basket and was alive thanks to him. Then the red-haired girl asked his name and introduced herself as Letitia, but the boy said nothing. Quickly, Letitia said he did not need to speak if he did not want to, again pondering the boy's ability to speak. He then mentioned danger, and the girl asked who was in danger hurriedly. Again the boy said danger, leaving Letitia confused about what he meant. The boy then jumped into the girl's arms, startling her. She returned the hug, wondering if that was what he meant by saying danger. In the cozy embrace, Letitia realized that he was trembling from the cold since his clothes were drenched. So she took off her coat, giving it to the boy to warm him up, surprising him a bit with the gesture. While she dressed him in it, the boy looked at her somewhat worriedly, saying a somewhat random word. Hearing this, Letitia was confused because the word he had said was Cerberus, which was a 3-headed dog from mythology. Angrily, the boy took off the coat, and Letitia told him to put it back on or he would get sick from that action. Surprising her, the blonde-haired boy placed the coat over both of them at the same time so neither would be cold. Sitting in the middle of the forest, curled up from the cold of the night dew. With a smile, Letitia looked at him and said he was very smart, surprising him with those words. Embarrassed and a little red, the boy looked down and started his sentence by saying tomorrow. Since he said nothing more after that, Letitia asked if that was the first time someone had complimented him. While staring at the boy, she wondered if he could really understand her, but did not understand why she felt she had had this conversation before. When Letitia seemed to remember something, she widened her eyes, showing surprise. Once she had met someone who reminded her of this boy because he spoke in the same way. Remembering a few days ago at her house, someone had slammed a wooden spoon on the table. Patiently, Letitia asked what had happened to her brother when he said he couldn't eat that soup because it was so bad. Surprised by this, the girl offered him a bit more salt. With anger in his eyes, the boy asked if his sister was an idiot because he wouldn't eat the soup as it was horrible. Grabbing a bread roll that was on the table, the red-haired boy told her to eat that soup, leaving her revolted because the bread he had taken was hers. Looking at his sister with disdain, the boy told her not to be mad since she did nothing and he needed to study. With a tired look where her brother had gone, Letitia wondered if she couldn't even eat in peace. As she finished speaking, the girl heard a piercing scream calling her name and was startled by it. She then went to her grandmother's bedroom door and asked what had happened for her to scream like that. The old woman, without looking in the girl's direction, said it was going to rain, leaving her confused by that statement. Letitia then told her grandmother that people had said it wouldn't rain that day, so there was no need to close the windows. Stressed, the old woman cursed the girl and said her legs were tingling. After her outburst, the old woman told the girl that her life no longer had meaning and it would be better to die because even if it hurt, she would close that window herself. The girl, worried, asked her grandmother not to do that, heading to the window to close it, asking only that the old woman stay in bed. On that dark night at the full moon with some stars in the sky, Letitia remembered that situation while she was curled up in the middle of the forest with a young boy. She had ended the day in that situation with that boy who had never been rude to her. She held the boy's hand, seeing that they were very warm. And while the boy slept with his head resting on her shoulder, the girl was thoughtful and sad, looking down. With this thought in mind, she fell asleep there with the little boy. The next morning, it was possible to hear people shouting from Michael in the mountains. With all that noise and shouting, Letitia ended up waking up. While rubbing her eye, she placed her hand on the boy's shoulder and asked if it was him they were looking for. Again, they shouted for Mr. Michael, and upon hearing that, the little boy was startled. With a comforting look, Letitia asked if he had run away from home, and as expected, he did not respond. Calmly, the girl told the boy that it was okay, thinking to herself that he was just a rich kid who had run away from home. Looking at the boy who seemed sad, Letitia thought about him being the heir to some family since the people searching for him even called him Mr. Asking the boy as if it were a secret, Letitia wanted to know if he was from a noble family, but as expected, the boy said nothing. Tense at seeing that the boy said nothing, she deduced that he was, and that it was better for him to go soon before getting into more trouble. Waving to the men who were searching for the boy, saying that he was there with her. The man who seemed to be the leader shouted for the other soldiers to go that way. With a smile, the redhead told the boy that now he could go home and should not run away again, because his parents must be worried about him, and upon hearing this, the boy looked sadly down without saying anything. The men threw some ropes on the ground when they arrived where they were, and they waved to the people in front, leaving Letitia surprised. A tall young man thanked the girl and asked for her name, startling her for a moment. Letitia then smiled at the man and introduced herself happily. Also smiling at her, the young man thanked her for spending the night with Mr. Michael, and the girl said it was nothing because she had only done her duty. In her thoughts, seeing Michael surrounded by guards, she wished she could say goodbye to the boy, but it probably would not be possible at that moment. The boy looked back in an attempt to see her, maybe for the last time. The guards arranged the carriage to take him home, and seeing all those people, Letitia was impressed. Because all those men and women had come just to search for Michael. Thinking about this, Letitia began to feel a little sad. Already a bit away from her, the girl was now alone there. With tears in her eyes, the girl sat on the forest floor, asking what about her, as the increased tears began to fall on her dress and her hand. She lowered her head, resting it on her knees, thinking about no one coming to look for her, when she heard a shout calling her name. Looking up with tear-filled eyes, confused, the girl saw Michael in front of her with a beautiful smile. She and Michael would meet again while the boy was looking at the path through his carriage window. 1 year after the incident, Letitia was still living in the same region. Letitia's father was telling her that they might be late that day and that she should take care of her grandmother and her brother's food. The girl then said he didn't need to worry. The man thanked her and told her to take care. With her usual warm smile, Letitia assured him she would take care of herself. While she was cleaning her house, she thought about being 14, her grandmother still being sick, and her brother continuing to study for the exams in the coming years. so her parents continued to leave all the house chores to her, like cleaning, hanging the clothes, washing them, among others. Her life was always that same routine. That year had passed so quickly that it was as if everything had been just a simple dream. She reached out to pick up the brooch that was on a table, the same one Michael had given her a year ago. The only thing she had to remember him by was that brooch, but at that moment she needed to hurry to get there on time. Those were her memories, and no one could mess with, erase, or change them. In the mountains where they had met, it was possible to see beautiful clouds, but it was already getting dark in that place. Crouched on the ground, Letitia put her hands behind her back, indicating she was in pain there, saying she had finished earlier this time, so she could go home. That day she had gathered plenty of herbs for her grandmother, and her parents would surely be proud. When a few raindrops fell on her, she was a bit startled, looking ahead, confused, looking at the rain, somewhat surprised. More drops began to fall where she was, turning into a storm. Not believing it, Letitia gathered her basket and said it was better to go home quickly before it got even worse. A lightning bolt then tore through the night sky, illuminating the center of that forest. With that, Letitia started to run hurriedly, trying not to get the herbs she had gathered that day wet, a bit worried because that lightning had come too close. When another one struck beside her, scaring the girl, who fell to the ground. Still trembling from the scare, Letitia stared at the tree that had been struck. Its trunk had been burned and was smoking. With a frightened look, Letitia began to think about what would have happened if she had been in that tree's place. Coming out of the trance, the girl knew the mountains were dangerous in such weather. So she picked up a brooch that she had dropped in the scare. But as she picked it up, she was struck by a huge lightning bolt. With a piercing scream, Letitia dropped her brooch and fell to the ground. Lying on the ground, all bruised from the incident, the girl groaned in pain. With wide eyes, trying to comprehend what had just happened, she started seeing images in her head of her parents, wondering what that was. What could that light she was seeing be? Maybe it was her memory or just a hallucination from being struck by lightning. Lying on the ground of that mountain, where she always went to gather herbs, she wondered one thing. Almost affirmatively to herself, she knew she was dying. Right there in that forest, she was certain of the question that kept repeating in her mind. And the only thing she did upon gaining this certainty was to reach for the brooch and squeeze it with the strength she had left. Just before closing her eyes, Letitia felt the rain on her face. Remembering the time she died hit by a big truck, the girl simply knew that this wasn't her first time dying. Where she was simply the world of a novel she had read. In that life, she was just meant to be a side character in the story, the sister of a corrupt official who, even after becoming an adult, was only exploited by her family and destined to die from a disease. That is, everything that had happened before had only been for the story to follow, because all she had lived before had been just a brief dream. However, the cold she was feeling, the fear, the pain, all of it was real. After the rain passed, a beautiful rainbow appeared in the sky. As the girl got up, picking up the brooch, she knew she didn't want to die. With tears in her eyes, she said she would not just be a sacrifice for her family. In the morning, the sun could be seen shining over the houses in the village where she lived. There was her brother telling his friends that he had to go home because it was late, but a boy with him asked him to stay a bit longer. But then that same boy looked astonished and asked if it was true that his sister worked at home all day and that the boy didn't help her at all. Boasting, Letitia's brother said that his sister acted like a servant while he studied all day. Filling a wooden bucket with water, there was a girl in front of the well with clothes on the ground, and the ones she wore were somewhat dirty, perhaps from the lightning. Then her brother came up behind her, elbowing her in the back and telling her to get out of there. While drying her face, she told him that she was washing her hair because she had spent the day gathering herbs for their grandmother. With a cynical smile, her disgusting brother told her to take advantage of washing and cut her hair since she looked like a loose woman. With anger in her eyes, Letitia said nothing to the redhead. Still with a disgusting smile on his face, the boy said that the food that day was awful and that she should prepare something better for her brother. Looking seriously at the boy, she said she would not prepare anything for him. Disbelieving that he had heard that from Letitia, her brother asked what she meant by that. Then, looking even angrier, Letitia spoke as if she had been clear in her last statement that she wouldn't make any food for him. Still disbelieving, the boy asked again, making Letitia stressed and almost asking if she needed to draw it for him to understand that she wouldn't cook anything for him. The girl said she was tired, and had almost hurt herself badly that day, so she was going to her bed to rest while her brother looked outraged, asking what they were going to eat. As if it were the stupidest question she had ever heard in her entire life, the girl told him to make dinner himself, leaving him very angry, asking himself if she had lost her mind. While looking at the boy, the teacher thought it would be best if he didn't pass that exam because he would be a terrible public servant and live off society. With visible anger in her eyes, she just stared at her brother, without saying anything else. She dumped her head in the bucket beside her, surprising the redhead with that action, who screamed hysterically if the teacher was out of her mind at that moment, pushing her away from the bucket, causing the girl to fall. With a mocking smile, Letitia put her hand to her hair and asked if the boy needed water as if he were crazy. Looking very angrily at his sister, the boy was outraged by what she had just said and said that the only crazy person there was her. And like a spoiled child, he left, asking how she dared to say that and that he would tell their parents everything as soon as they got home, leaving Letitia surprised by those words behind. At night, the sky was dark, with the only light being the moon shining intensely over the village. The girl's father, arriving home, opened her bedroom door and called her. With a clear conscience, Letitia looked at her father innocently and asked what he wanted. Her parents then entered the room, saying that her brother had told them everything about that day and that she had also been rude to her grandmother. They asked what was going on with the girl because she couldn't act that way with her family. Then, with a sad look, Letitia apologized to her parents. With an angry expression, her father said that she probably didn't understand yet because she was too young, but there would be many difficulties when she got older. However, everyone made mistakes, and he would let it go this time. Gently patting the girl's head, her father told her to go apologize to her grandmother and brother. The girl then said nothing, clenching her dress in frustration, and with tears running down her face, she told her parents that she was very tired. However, because she spoke too softly, maybe her parents didn't hear and asked her to repeat when the girl then screamed that she was very tired of all that. Starting to vent to them, she said she was the first to wake up in the morning because she had to prepare lunch before they even got up. She spent her whole day searching for medicines in the mountains for her grandmother and her parents, and while they listened stunned, they said nothing. And when she got home, there was still so much to be done. Seeing this situation, her mother approached her and wiped away her tear. She hugged her because she didn't know she was going through that. Crying in that embrace, the girl's mother apologized. In that comforting hug, while crying, Letitia knew that her parents will understand, or at least her mother would. As she left the hug and her mother wiped her tears, the girl said she was okay. At that moment, the woman was happy to hear that. And then, as if nothing had happened, she'd asked Letitia to go apologize to her brother and grandmother. With her eyes filling with tears again, the girl looked at her mother, horrified. Then the woman asked what had happened to her, if she was mad because she had taken the side of her brother and grandmother. Saying this, Letitia's mother looked at her somewhat disappointed, saying she thought she had grown up, but she was mistaken. Her father, then furious, said he had already told the woman that. Then, looking down at her, he ordered the girl to go apologize to her grandmother and brother, but especially to her brother, asking the girl if he really had to tell her everything she had to do, because Letitia was not a child and should know that life wasn't easy. He also said he understood it wasn't that simple, but they told all their friends how good a daughter she was, feeling like a puppet being manipulated while her parents said she was the best thing that ever happened to them and that everyone had difficulties. And they ended by saying she needed to be good and do good to everyone, even if they mistreated her. Still angry and not believing what she was hearing, Letitia asked if they really worked much harder than she did, snapping again, saying that if it was that way, her brother should do what she did, and she would study in his place. Her father then angrily asked what she was talking about, and her mother told her to apologize because she had been rude. The girl, still shouting, asked if that would be good for her future, if he was sure about that. Then she clenched her fist in anger and asked if they did anything for her in that house. Still angry, the girl's father said he thought her brother was exaggerating, but saw that he wasn't, and at that moment, she was grounded. The red-haired girl then talked about how she always brought more herbs than needed, but it seemed that nothing pleased them. And as soon as Letitia finished speaking, her father, without thinking twice, lunged at her and slapped her face. Angry and trying not to cry, the girl bit her lower lip. She looked at her father and asked if he was lying because she no longer needed to bring medicine for her grandmother. The man, still furious, stared at the girl and said he had never imagined that from her. What made her think he was lying? Irritated, he raised his voice and asked who was telling her that kind of thing, saying she was talking nonsense. He ended by saying she was grounded until she realized what she had done wrong. In her thoughts, the teacher said she was just testing her parents, but that life was still the same. Surprising them, the girl apologized and said she had lost her mind for a moment. She also said she wasn't sure what she had said but felt horrible about it. Her mother then approached her again, wiping her tears and saying she should keep doing what she always did because it wasn't that hard. With a noticeably fake smile, the girl said what she was doing was easy and she wanted to do more for her family, that she wanted to get a job to pay for her brother's studies when he passed the exam. Her mother then said she was still too young to work. Seeming sad, the teacher said she knew she wasn't doing her best for her family and wanted to do more. With a disturbing smile, her father thought to himself that he was worried that the medicine she brought home might not be worth as much money anymore. Then he put his hand on his daughter's shoulder and said that if she really wanted to be more useful at home, he would see if he could find a job for her. While the parents were talking to the girl, her brother appeared at the door, looking inside the room surreptitiously. Smiling at the situation, he thought to himself that his sister was an idiot because she had caused the whole situation. The next day, there was the teacher at the door of her house with her suitcase, saying goodbye to her parents. The girl had gotten a job with the richest family in town. The owner had heard many good things about the girl and offered to pay double. Her parents, with this news, were very enthusiastic, knowing she would bring a lot of money home when she returned. But after a month, they unfortunately had to wake up from that sweet dream they had, because as soon as Letitia received her first payment, she disappeared from the map with it. In a beautiful house with a magnificent garden belonging to Baron Jefferson's family, someone asked if the girl was really 16 years old. With a serious look, adjusting her glasses, a woman said she didn't look that age. Then the girl said that her family had very small people. Then the woman said it didn't matter, handing over a contract for the girl to write her name. Strictly, the woman said that if she didn't stay there for at least 3 months, they would take all her salaries, and as she ran away, she could never appear there again. While Letitia hurriedly wrote her name, the woman thought about how useful she would be there. The purple-haired woman asked another woman to take Letitia, and the girl who would accompany her then called her, saying that the work was urgent. As they walked down the corridor of the large mansion, with a smile, Letitia told herself that she wondered if they would really accept her there. The market servants who recommended the job hadn't lied, when suddenly the woman beside her interrupted her thoughts, talking about 2 years. 2 years was the age difference she had from the age she had said, but if the woman before had accepted it, even though it was obvious, she wouldn't say anything to anyone. She continued, saying that no matter how desperate she was, she needed to work hard because they were short-staffed. With a smile at the woman, the girl said she would work hard, and the woman glanced at her sideways, saying that if she was still there after 3 months, she would believe her. Then she asked if the girl would like to cook, clean, or fetch materials. She said she liked cooking, thinking of her plans to work in that house until she was an adult and had enough money to open a snack bar or a restaurant. Seemingly not having heard what the girl said, the woman said she would be in the cleaning area. The woman also said that initially they would provide her clothes, but the girl was very small to know if they would fit. However, she would look, and if she found any, she would let her know. She handed a broom to the teacher and pushed her into a room, telling the girl to get to work. Looking inside, she saw another person in the room and greeted her. It was a taller girl like all the others who stared at her for a while. The woman then quickly introduced herself and told the girl to start cleaning. She pointed to a place where Letitia could rest when she finished cleaning everything. The girl asked where her room was, and the woman replied that the rooms were on the 4th floor and she could take any empty bed. With a thoughtful smile, Letitia told herself she had confidence in her cleaning. If she could hold out a bit longer, she would achieve all her goals. In another part of the city, the imperial castle could be seen. Inside it was a man raving that he might as well talk to the wall, with another young man trying to calm him down. Stressed, the old man complained that the idiot was the prince of the country, and the younger one beside him told him to be careful with what he said because the walls there had ears. Angrily, the man gave Sir George advice, saying that if he believed in that prince, he would end up in misery. Hearing this, George told the man that his prince was not an idiot. With a foolish smile on his face, the old man said that there was only one person in the whole world who thought that way, and that person was George. When the man turned his back, walking away from the young man. The latter cursed him in his thoughts. Clenching his fist, George said that was why he hated scholars, because a person like that could never be loyal to Michael. Angry, remembering what the old man had said, George recalled that Michael's father was his former master, the most intelligent person in the empire. Even though it was the imperial family, Michael was the duke's son, so it was proof that the king would have a good life. If he remembered correctly, Michael's parents had died suddenly. Then the emperor ordered Michael to be raised in a country house far from everything and everyone. Angrily, Sir George closed his eyes, lamenting that if Lord Michael had been raised by servants instead of assassins, everything would be different. With bright eyes, looking at George, there was young Michael. The man then introduced himself to the child, saying that he served the emperor and was there to take him to the imperial palace. From that moment on, he was the honor of the empire, being the crown prince. When George finished speaking, the boy simply responded by saying tree, leaving the man shocked. Seeming happy, the boy then repeated that word to the man. Remembering that, he punched the table in anger. With fury in his eyes, Sir Georgie asked how those people could have spoken about the child without even having seen him first. Angry, the man said to Georgie that when they asked the boy questions, he always answered correctly. Without thinking twice, Georgie looked at the faces of the three blessed ones in front of him, saying they didn't even think of talking to the child because it disturbed their peace. Dazed by what was happening, Sir Georgie lowered his gaze. Returning to the present moment, Georgie lamented that it was already over, and there was nothing more he could do. Entering a room, Georgie apologized to Michael for having sent him away. When he was about to finish his sentence, the boy called for Letitia, and the Lord wondered if that was really what he was hearing. But the prince, furious, shouted again for Letitia. Meanwhile, at Baron Jefferson's mansion, a shout for Letitia could also be heard. Frightened, the girl asked what they wanted. Then the voice that had called before said they needed her help in the kitchen, and with that, the girl smiled, finally going to the place where she really wanted to be working. The woman asked the girl to call Gally and then come to the kitchen. With a smile, Letitia thanked her. It had only been a week since the young girl started working there, but the changes were already noticeable. With a smile on her face, Gally told the girl not to forget to wash her hands before starting to cook. Happy in her thoughts, she'd bragged about being able to work in the kitchen and being as good as the other employees. With a smile, she asked Gally to take care of things there, since she was now going to the kitchen. The woman then congratulated her for achieving her goal. Still thinking, the girl remembered that she had done only what she could, nothing more. Then she remembered a scene where she cleaned the house so well that it left the other employees shocked. She had only done half of what she did at home, yet the maids were impressed with her skills. However, the women might have just been kind to her, so she didn't fully believe what they said. After all, she had believed in her family's kind words without ever imagining what they did behind her back. But what she was living at that moment was real. If she could cook, she could earn more money. Determined to learn everything she could in the kitchen, Letitia headed toward the door. Back at the palace, George was seen talking to the prince because he remembered who Letitia was. The girl with hair as red as blood and eyes as yellow as sunflowers, the same one they found beside the prince in the mountains when he got lost. Irritated, the prince kept repeating the girl's name. Astonished, Sir Georgie asked if the prince wanted to see her again. Seeming happy that this was the first word he could understand from Michael, Sir George was determined to find the girl at any cost. Looking admiringly at Letitia was the head maid, unbelieving how thin the girl was. She then asked if she was sure she could work there, being so thin, and upon hearing that, she apologized while the woman told another to continue the work. On the table, on a plate, there was a beautiful apple pie that seemed to have just come out of the oven. As Letitia looked at the pie, salivating, the woman invited her to eat. While eating, Letitia thought that maybe they sent her to the kitchen to eat because she was very thin, and when she finished the food, she would probably go back to cleaning the floor. Thinking about that, a little sad, she brought the fork with a piece of pie to her mouth. Her eyes sparkled because the taste was delicious. Without thinking twice, the girl praised the pie, and the woman boasted about being the cook, saying that normally she would have to be a high-level servant to eat that. And when the girl asked if she could be eating, the woman asked what would be the advantage of working in the kitchen if she couldn't eat that. Thanking her, Letitia started eating a bit too quickly, making the woman joke that her food wouldn't run away. In her past life, she didn't know how to cook, so she always bought food, but in this one, she was going to learn to make many dishes. Meanwhile, in a place far from where Letitia was, someone was trying to talk to a knight. Crying, the woman begged the man to find her daughter, offering whatever he wanted in return for helping them, and an old woman beside her said it was all her fault and she should die. Not understanding what was happening and not caring, the man asked if the girl had simply left home. Angrily, Letitia's father said she wasn't that type and surely had been influenced by some boy. Confused by the situation, the guard asked if it hadn't been a kidnapping or murder, wanting to know how she disappeared. With tears in her eyes, Letitia's mother began to explain the situation to the man, saying that her daughter was supposed to have returned a week ago. In his thoughts, the man guessed that the girl might be in a nearby town called Tatum, but breaking his thoughts, the woman said they had already gone there. Then the man asked the age of the woman's daughter, and she replied that the girl was only 14 years old. With this, the guard realized that the girl was too young to be a servant somewhere. In his thoughts, the man reflected that some poor families sold their daughters as servants, but they claimed to love Letitia, and it wasn't normal behavior to run away after receiving her first salary. Catching the young man's attention, the girl's mother called out to him, but he had already realized that there was nothing more to do there. Where could the girl be if the family had already searched Tatum, thinking she was surely in a more distant town, like the capital, for example, as it would be a place for a commoner to flee from her parents? The young knight's master had finally asked him for something after so long. He was determined not to disappoint him and to find the girl with red hair. A month had passed since then, and Letitia continued to work in the mansion. The dishes gleamed in the drainer as someone said they had finished washing, and another person told her to eat before going. With a silly face, Letitia was eating a plate of food while wondering if they still suspected her. Taking a full of food to her mouth, the girl thought about how good it was and that she didn't need to worry for now. With a smile, the head cook told the girl to be careful while eating, otherwise she would end up with a stomachache. Looking at the girl, the woman asked why she wanted to work in the kitchen so much. With a sweet smile, the girl simply said she wanted to learn how to cook. Then the woman asked if she wasn't disappointed that she couldn't even handle a knife. With that, the girl said that at first she was really frustrated, but the food was so good that she didn't care anymore. The cook started laughing at the girl's words, making her ask if she had said something wrong, and the woman replied no, but she was happy that the girl liked her food. Collecting the plate, she also said that starting the next day, the girl wouldn't wash any more dishes. First, the girl would cut potatoes, and then the lady would teach her to cook. Without a reaction to hearing that, Letitia thanked her with a sparkle in her eyes. However, for that to happen, the girl had to work hard, and she said she would do her best there. Not far from where the girl was, a man was looking out the window. He was impatient because he wanted to know why he was in that place, and a woman beside him said there was a reason. The man then said that all they could do was be nice, hoping the maids would help them. The woman, who was the man's wife, said they should have been notified since she was still teaching etiquette to her children. Still impatient, the man, who was a baron named Jefferson, said nothing made him feel secure, and the woman agreed with him. She then asked if Jefferson was going to give up, but the young man said no. Since his brother died, he had received the title of baron, but had never been invited to royal parties. The person who was going to see them would certainly give them a good opportunity, even though he didn't know the reason yet. The next day, a table was set with many snacks and appetizing foods. Some women who seemed to be servants were talking and laughing while eating, until someone desperately shouted for the head maid. At the door was a boy looking tired, and the woman asked what he wanted. The boy then started saying that she had sent them to get the best dishes. Already tense about what would come next, the head maid confirmed what he said. Then the boy announced that Sir George, the prince's guard, was there, causing someone to drop some plates on the floor. Starting to pick up the pieces, the person quickly apologized for that. Not understanding, the woman asked why he was there since they usually got at least a week's notice. Tense, Letitia wondered if she already knew Sir George, remembering that he would be the guard of the greatest tyrant in the empire's history a few years ahead. In the fight for the throne, many of the emperor's children began killing each other for power, otherwise they would have to wait for the youngest son to grow up to finally take over. George was the only one loyal to Michael, and the emperor died suddenly on the day the prince came of age. That was strange, but the only one who could stop the heir's madness was George. With just one word from the knight, the handsome prince stopped the executions and began to punish with life imprisonment. However, George only lived until he was 50 years old because he was assassinated. After that, no one could stop the emperor, who was also assassinated soon after. And remembering that Michael was also the name of the boy in the forest, Letitia sighed because it was strange for such an innocent boy to have the same name as a crazy tyrant. After that, she began to wonder why the prince's guard was there, but as she was just a servant, it didn't matter to her. She knew they were getting closer to each other. When the man finally arrived at the mansion, he was announced as such, and Letitia knew that all she needed was to stay away from him. When he got out of his carriage and walked toward the entrance, where two people were waiting for him, George was happy not to stray from his path to find the girl. There was nothing else a 14-year-old girl would do in the capital except work as a maid. If he searched only in places with a few servants, he would quickly find her. But to avoid disturbing His Highness, George would have to follow the proper procedures, and Baron Jefferson was the right person for that job. If the Baron was interested in having connections with high society, it would be easy to make Letitia Woods an official maid of the palace. Finally, George had the chance to fulfill a wish of the prince, and that girl would just be a toy for the boy. In the kitchen, there was total chaos due to the rush to serve something to the guard. In a hurry, the cooks shouted for ingredients while telling the others what to do. The nervousness due to the lack of time was visible on the servants' faces. While peeling potatoes, Letitia thought that this was the first time in a month she had been there that they were this busy. People like that always gave days of notice before showing up, but the guard had simply arrived that morning. She wondered if the prince had so much power for his guard to arrive that way since the boy was just a puppet. And with that, Letitia got distracted and dropped the potato. Angry, the head cook asked what was going on. And at the same time, a terrified servant shouted that the silverware had disappeared, pointing to a clearly empty cabinet. The head cook found that strange since the silverware was reserved for important guests. She ordered one of her servants to inform the madam about what happened, but the young girl questioned it since the woman was probably busy. Angry, the head cook said the girl didn't know that woman's personality, and as she didn't inform her at that moment, it was likely that she would make them all search for the silverware naked. Afraid, the girl asked if the madam wouldn't make them strip at that moment, and the older woman confirmed that she wouldn't since Sir George was there. So the servant ran off to report what had happened. Seeing what was going on, a young woman commented that she thought things were calmer, and a young man beside her said that probably half of the newcomers would leave again. Desperate, a blue-haired woman asked if they could manage since all the silverware was missing. Then the woman who had been speaking before said they just needed to enforce stricter discipline among the employees, making the woman a bit tense. Since it was common for this to happen during a training of newcomers, but the madam always knew how to identify the thief. Frightened, the girl asked if there was a reason for the servants to do that. Laughing, the head cook asked the girl how she planned to last a month in that place being so inattentive. Then something happened in the kitchen, quickly catching Letitia's attention. With a serious tone, the Baron's wife entered the kitchen, asking if the silverware had indeed been stolen. The madam then put her hand to her forehead, asking what they would do after the head cook confirmed it. Right after, she said they needed to find the thief before they escaped. But how could they do that with George already there? As a solution, the cook said that by the time he left, the silverware might already have been sold, and that they should ask for his understanding and immediately go after the thief, starting with large places where the silverware could be hidden. Terrified by the situation, Letitia wondered how they could consider saying such things to someone so close to the prince. With that, the madam told head cook Luce that the thief was probably one of her servants, but the older woman said there was a chance it wasn't since they had cleaned that same silverware the day before. Arrogantly, the Baron's wife told Luce that since she hadn't received enough education, she didn't understand that she was just talking about the likelihood of such things happening. 3 terrified servants wondered why the silverware disappeared on the day an important visitor arrived. Catching everyone's attention, someone clapped to announce something. Not understanding, head cook Luce asked why they were standing around doing nothing, saying that just because the silverware was missing, it didn't mean the Lord wouldn't eat. Then Letitia quickly went back to peeling her potatoes with the announcement. She couldn't focus because so many things were happening at the same time. An unexpected visit, the theft of the silverware. And while thinking about this, a not-so-old man entered the kitchen shouting her name. The frightened girl stammered a bit in her speech, but asked what had happened. When the old man grabbed her arm tightly, intending to take her somewhere, Letitia screamed desperately, wanting to know what was happening, and the man looked at her somewhat irritated. He replied that what he had to say wasn't good to be said there aloud. Confused, Letitia wondered what was going on. The man took her to a room, announcing that he had brought the girl they asked for. Looking at the Baron, the girl wondered if he thought she was the thief or something. Without thinking twice, she knelt on the floor before the man. She began to explain that she had never touched the silverware and that if he didn't believe her, he could talk to the head cook. Surprising her, Jefferson said he hadn't called her for that reason. Then he showed her the brooch that Michael had given her in the forest, saying he had found it hidden in her bed. The girl focused on the gold brooch with red stones and a lion in the middle. Tense, she thought about having hidden it under her bed for fear of losing it while working and wondered if they had found it while searching for the silverware. Hurriedly, Letitia told the man that she hadn't stolen it, and he asked if she was saying it was hers and who had given it to her. Losing eye contact, the girl told the Baron that she didn't know. Angrily, he asked indignantly how she didn't know who had given it to her. Apparently, Letitia didn't know to whom it belonged, and it would have been better for her to just say she found it somewhere, but the girl said all she wanted was to return it to its owner. Surprising her, the man said he would believe her. However, he wanted to know what she had done to receive that as a reward, so the girl explained that she had just helped someone in the mountains. With a sly smile upon hearing that, the Baron asked if she was confessing, leaving her confused, asking if the girl really didn't know the significance of that brooch, because normally she could never have that in her hands, and the girl said she knew that very well. Desperate, Letitia started to say that apparently the man was mistaken about something, but before she could continue, she was interrupted. Then the two quickly looked toward the entrance door of the room they were in. In front of her were all the servants wanting to talk to the Baron. Confused, he asked what was going on. Beth, who was at the front, said she could vouch for Letitia, who already had tears in her eyes. Starting her speech, she said that Letitia wasn't brazen enough to steal the silverware. She didn't know what had reached the man's ears, but he was certainly mistaken. Beth didn't know if they were talking about the plates or something else, but she knew Letitia was too naive to take something that wasn't hers and would certainly confess. Another woman stepped forward, telling Jefferson that she agreed with her colleague's opinion, since she had personally checked Letitia's room at night and found nothing. The blue-haired girl said she was Letitia's roommate and would certainly notice something wrong. Still crying, Letitia was surprised that her co-workers were doing this. But Baron Jefferson didn't care about what they said and ordered them to leave. However, Beth spoke up again, saying they wouldn't leave without the redhead, leaving the man incredulous. Then Luce informed him that they didn't have enough workforce and needed the girl. With this, Jefferson became furious, seeing that he had no authority over his servants, shouting for them to leave, but Beth repeated that without Letitia, they wouldn't go anywhere. The Baron then asked angrily if they thought the girl was there because of the missing silverware. And after this question, someone asked if it wasn't for that reason, why was the girl being interrogated? In shock, recognizing the voice, Baron Jefferson looked frightened, seeing Sir George standing at the door, looking at him. Letitia stared at the purple-haired man while he looked at her kneeling in front of the Baron. Seeing him, Jefferson stood up quickly, calling out the man's name. With a small smile, George told him that he thought he was interrogating her about the missing silverware, but he saw that wasn't the reason, so they needed to talk. Asking politely for the servants to leave the room, but no one moved, making the Baron shout for them to leave, asking if they were deaf. Then everyone, including Letitia, left that place. With a smile, the head cook told Letitia she could go back to work, making the girl ask if they didn't want to know why she was being interrogated. As if it were nonsense, Luce asked if the girl thought she would be the only one to suffer the consequences. It wasn't the first time something like that happened, but they always protected each other. They didn't know what the lords were talking about, but nothing would happen to the redhead. Besides, they hadn't lied when they said they were short-staffed and they could go back to work at that moment. Letitia then smiled at her co-workers, affirming that they could indeed return. In the room where Baron Jefferson and Sir George were, the purple-haired man was interrogating the older man to know what he was talking about with the servant. The Baron then stated it wasn't anything important, but thought the Lord was talking to his wife. Seriously, Georgia told the man that he was with her until he saw such a mess. It was a very interesting spectacle happening there. Squeezing his knee in anger, the Baron cursed the servants for that, because it could make him lose another opportunity. Thinking about the incident with Letitia Woods, a gold brooch had been found under the bed of a girl never seen before. Taking a sip of his tea, the man continued to think that it wasn't a common occurrence, but by George's reaction, he had come there to see her. If it weren't for those nosy servants, he would have found out before the Lord arrived. Still serious, George continued to say that if the silverware wasn't found in the girl's room, the Baron had made a false accusation. Jefferson then sighed, tired of the conversation, placing the brooch on the table, showing George the reason he had called him. Surprised to see it, the knight asked where the old man had found it. Baron Jefferson then began to say that he was with the servant and had asked if she had stolen it. But the girl said someone had given it to her, asking if the Lord could believe that. George then started to say that he would like to ask for the Baron's help. Under the smile, the man asked what he could do for a man like Lord George. Then the young man began to tell the Baron what he needed. Back in the kitchen, Letitia told someone that the lords didn't need to come to her as she would go to them. The beautiful mansion is shown from the outside as Letitia walks to Jefferson's office. When she arrives, she knocks on the door, asking for permission before entering. Upon opening the door, the girl begins to enter the room where she was called. The gentlemen then stare at the girl as soon as she completes the action. Looking at them, Letitia wonders why they are acting that way. Then Baron Jefferson smiles and asks the girl to come in. Tense, the redhead starts by saying she would never take something that didn't belong to her. But before she could finish her sentence, Jefferson interrupts, saying he believes her since being part of his family, she would never do such a thing. Confused, the girl listens as the Baron starts to say that from that day on, her mother was his cousin, so they were relatives. The girl then said she didn't understand where the man was going, but he said she knew exactly what he meant. He then explained that Sir George wanted her to work at the palace. She deserved something better, and there she would have everything she needed, being the crown prince's servant, and the knight would take care of everything. In shock, Letitia tried to understand what was happening since the Baron had asked her to pretend to be part of his family. He then stood up from his seat, telling her to calm down, but the reluctant girl didn't want to work at the palace. Jefferson then squeezed the girl's arm tightly, making her let out a small groan of pain. He told the girl that they couldn't miss this opportunity for both their families. Startled, the redhead tried to speak to the man, but couldn't finish her sentence. Letitia knew it would be an honor to be the crown prince's servant, but she also knew that if she went, she would be killed. Baron Jefferson continued, saying he expected her to work in the castle as well as she worked in his house. The girl tried again to refuse, almost begging the man to give her another chance there. Meanwhile, the knight remained calm, sipping his tea with a smile on his face, knowing he would leave with Letitia whether she wanted to or not. Kneeling on the floor, her voice trembling, the redhead tried to speak to her superior, saying she wasn't good enough and would only be a hindrance at the palace, begging him to reconsider. The Baron then knelt to be at the girl's level and said she had nothing to worry about since they had been watching her for a while, and she did a great job. And if the redhead weren't trustworthy, there was no reason for all the servants to go out of their way to help her keep that job. Still desperate, the girl started to say she liked working in the mansion's kitchen and didn't need special treatment, begging the Baron to reconsider. She took hold of the man's shirt, clutching it, making him look at her in shock. Pushing the girl away, the Baron said he didn't know she liked working there, but couldn't help her. He ordered the girl to get up since she was still on the floor, looking at her with disdain. He approached the redhead's ear and told her to stop because it wasn't a game. Frightened, Letitia pushed the man away with her hand, knowing she was mistaken since bedding wouldn't help her. With a smile, the old man thanked the girl for finally understanding the situation. Returning the cup to the table, George said it seemed a decision had finally been made, announcing to Letitia that she only needed to follow him since her things had already been taken to the carriage, and she asked about the brooch. The knight said she would have to return it as soon as they arrived at the palace. With a sad face, Letitia said she would like to say goodbye to her colleagues. But the Baron reminded her that Sir George was a busy man, so she should move on as there wasn't time. She just had to accept her fate, because that was her life. As she left the mansion, Lord George led her to his carriage. Opening the door, the man told her she couldn't leave until he ordered. With a small smile, Letitia asked if she was going alone, knowing that if she did, it would be a great opportunity to escape. As if reading the girl's thoughts, George denied it, saying that if she went alone, she might take the chance to flee. Then Letitia questioned why, since everyone going was men, it would be much better if she went alone, but mocking her, Lord George said no one would do anything to a mere servant. Then, as if by magic, the girl had an idea and said she wasn't a mere servant. Since she was part of the Baron's family, what would people think if they heard about this? Realizing what was happening, Lord George put his hand to his forehead, grumbling. Taking advantage of the situation, Batisha said that a coarse maiden couldn't serve the prince, so the lord should go back and say he had made a wrong choice, but he said he couldn't. But maybe the redhead was right, and with this comment, the girl was surprised. Tired of it, he continued to say she was a lady. Even though she had left crying, it wasn't appropriate for him to be in a carriage with someone who wasn't officially from the castle. With that, the girl began to climb into the carriage that would take her. More at ease as she sat, Batisha thought about having avoided the worst, because if anyone else had gone with her, she couldn't even think of escaping. Lord George then asked her to keep something secret, surprising the girl. And with a serious face, he warned that they would be riding at full speed and that it was good she didn't try to escape. On the way, the knights shouted and whipped the horses to make them go even faster. The animals, with their shiny coats in the sunlight, did their job well. Inside the carriage, Batisha couldn't even sit properly due to the speed and the bumps. Knowing she couldn't continue in that state, the girl decided it was time to escape, even as she might be escorted. Since as she entered the palace, she would be the lady of a tyrannical crown prince, it was much better to earn a minimum wage as a servant than that. Hurriedly, she put her hands to her head, trying to think of a quick plan to escape. But before she had time, the palace gates opened for the carriage to enter. Terrified, looking out the window, the girl couldn't believe they had already arrived. Suddenly, she heard someone shouting angrily, calling for someone, and Batisha wondered what was happening. When she saw Sir George arguing with two young men outside, she adjusted her skirt and opened the carriage door, knowing it didn't concern her. Angry, George told the men they needed to tighten the saddles while, not far away, the girl quietly sneaked out of the carriage. Running towards some trees quickly while they didn't notice her absence, the sun shone brightly over the trees where the girl was. She looked around and wondered if it was a garden, but there was too much vegetation for it to be. But whether it was or not, it was a good place for her to hide, and if someone found her, she could say she got lost. She planned to spend the night there and at dawn, flee far away. She would start using a false name. Even though probably no one would come after her, she needed to enter a noble's house. Then, while lost in these thoughts, the girl came across something that surprised her. Apparently, she was in a dead-end alley of large plants. Looking at it, the redhead wondered if she was in a maze, but she knew all she needed to do was wait for dawn and follow the direction of the sun. The girl needed to get out of that place because she wasn't in the mood to die. The next morning, the sun shone high, illuminating the vast green maze that seemed endless. Looking up, Batisha was tired because she had walked so much and still never reached the end. She sighed, knowing she couldn't call for help because Georgie would probably appear. Wondering where she should go, the girl finally saw a point of light through the leaves. She was startled because, after so long walking, she had probably found the exit of that place that didn't seem to have one. Squeezing through the hole between the plants, Batisha knew she was close to finally being free. When she got out, she was hit by the bright light on her face, raising her hand to her eyes. But when she opened them, she saw something that left her more than surprised. In front of her was Michael picking flowers and looking at the girl, surprised. Immediately, she recognized him and called his name. The prince looked at her, blushing, and in surprise, dropped the flowers he was holding. With a smile, the redhead said she hadn't been walking in vain, wondering if it was some dream. Quickly, the boy bent down to pick up more flowers he had been holding before. And with a beautiful smile, he handed some of them to Letitia, telling her the names of the flowers. The girl quickly understood, since in the mountains a flower meant longing. With a smile, the girl asked if he knew they would meet again, but it wasn't surprising coming from a noble, and as she spoke, the boy looked at her with a dreamy expression. He talked about destiny, surprising her. Perhaps he had tried to smoke the flowers instead of just picking them. Letitia looked at him with a love-struck expression, trying to understand. The prince then gave a beautiful smile, saying that it was destiny. To ensure you don't miss the unfolding of this romance, give a gentle tap on the notification bell, and I see you on the next tale.